Hey, you guys, just waiting for Chatila to join. Or she's joined. Here we go. I think so. Let's get it done. Okay. There.
Hi,
Hey, lady.
how are you?
Good, good. So you have a topic for today, which I'm really grateful for. I was going to go in a different direction, but I liked your topic. So
Oh,
what is
really?
it? Yeah.
Okay, is the traffic too loud in the back?
I can hear it, but it's not too loud.
Okay. Yes, okay, so like I sent you the message earlier, I've been having a lot of conversations with people talking about emotional eating
Yeah.
and having the awareness that they're emotionally eating, but then kind of being in the space of, okay, I know that I'm using food for this dopamine hit to, make me feel better. I'm trying not to do that anymore. However, I still have these urges for those hits, but I don't know what to replace it with. And I'm kind of in this in-between phase. So I thought this would be a good topic to talk about because it is pretty a pretty important topic because I think that we do this more often than we even realize that we're doing it.
Yeah. And I loved it because the person who sent it to you was already aware, right?
Uh-huh.
Like she was like, I'm looking for my dopamine hit, which I was just like,
Yeah.
yes, like understanding that she was looking for that, since that the dopamine hit that we talked about last week when we were talking about sugar addiction, right? Like we eat these foods and then they actually release chemicals that make us happy, right?
Yeah.
And then she had also said, I'm looking, like I'm replacing it with something that I also not wanting to replace it with, which was like shopping or something like that. And
Yes.
then also, but then saying, I know I need to do other healthier things. And this is a conversation we have a lot with people. And I really had to think about like, what is the process that I recommend that people go through. And so I think we should take it back to just the person who first is not aware, right? Because being able to, I think, recognize it is like the first step, right? And I find that that feeling can present itself as a lot of different things in a lot of different people. And me, it presents as anxiety, right? Like I get really anxious when and I feel like my heart is racing, or I'm in need of something, right? Like I feel like I need to crunch something, or I need like a certain flavor, or I feel like I'm having brain fog. And as a result of that, I reach for food, or I reach for, TV, right? Or I reach for, sweets, right? So I'm reaching for things to fill that void. And I oftentimes, I mean, it took me a long time. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you before I realized that that anxiety was really synonymous with sort of my addictions, right? It was that lack of dopamine. I'm trying to figure out where to get the dopamine from. And I think I talked about this last week. It's like your body remembers what made you feel good the last time, right? So you go back to the thing that you know. So you go into default. So my default conditioning might be going for sweets. My default conditioning might be getting an argument. You know what I mean? It can look like a lot of things. My default can look like going to sleep, right? Like we default into some other habit to fill that need. What else do you see like as like symptoms of that? Like I need a dopamine hit or that craving.
I know for me, it's like irritation.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar. Like I feel anxious, but it's more so I'm irritated. I don't really want to be bothered. I feel like I'm like, sorry, I don't know what's going on. I feel like I'm like emotionally depleted, and I just don't have anything else to give. My cup is empty. Like it's not
Yeah.
even like half. It's like empty, and I
Mm-hmm.
have nothing else to give anyone else. And I just want to retreat into a little hole with my ice cream and be left alone.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like for me. And then I'm irritated.
Yeah.
Like if I can't get that space away from people, then now I'm irritable.
Yeah.
Having to still do and give and show up when I don't have it to do and give and show up. So that for me,
Yeah.
that's what it looks like.
And
Um,
and
yeah.
No, so what I usually recommend that people do, and not everybody knows what this means, but I tell people to sit with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the first step is like sitting with that feeling of discomfort. Because what happens is that we automatically will go to the things that are most comfortable for us. And so if you're an emotional eater, then you're going to go for food. If you can get really irritable and want to fight, like, people call it hangry, right? You get irritable and you want to argue, or you end up arguing, or you have a short temper, right? So before that, you go into that default. If you can notice, hey, I'm feeling uncomfortable here, and then take a moment to like breathe through it and sit with it. And what I mean by that is recognize how it feels in your body. Like, what does that feeling feel like? And I know that seems really strange because it's like we're so used to doing. Sometimes, particularly if we're trying to change habits, and I'll bring up a term that I'll explain in just a second, but it's called neuroplasticity. When we're trying to reshape the way our brains work, we have to like recognize that there's a problem and be able to say, okay, so this is how I feel when I get hangry, or whatever the problem is. And then you can go on to step number 2, which is figuring out what to do about it, right? But the first thing is recognizing it, sitting with it, understanding what it feels like. And what you'll be surprised to find out, for most people, it's the same feeling. It doesn't matter what the trigger is, it's the same feeling. It's like there's a specific part of your body that tends to knot up. It can be in your shoulders, it can be in your stomach. Some people present with like gastric reflux or heartburn or bloating. I mean, they're physical feelings to that dopamine hit, or that deprivation that you're having because you're going through withdrawals,
Yeah.
or something like it. What do you do?
Me, or in general?
Either.
What do you do that? Well, like you were saying, what I've heard you teach a lot, and what I've learned is exactly what you just said. Sit with it. Because when we are kind of on autopilot, and it's like, okay, I feel this way, I kind of recognize that I'm feeling this way, but not really. It's more of like a subconscious awareness. Then subconsciously I start, okay, I just need to go and reach for the ice cream. I just need to go and have pizza, and that's going to make everything better. So to your point, just taking a moment to pause before kind of reaching, slowing yourself down and saying, okay, what am I actually feeling right now? Like you were saying, where am I feeling it? And having that awareness that not only can this be an emotional reaction that's happening, but a physical one, like you said. So I'm really glad that you pointed that out too, because I don't think sometimes we realize how often we can have physical symptoms to what's going on, like I guess emotionally with us. But it's a very real thing. So I think, and I've learned from you, like that first step is truly just taking a moment, pausing, saying, journaling. And I know we tell people this in the program, like if you get hungry or if you have a craving, just journal. And they're like, what? Why would I want to sit down and journal? Like I just want to go eat like a piece of candy. Why would I do this? But when you take a second to do that, then you start having this awareness to where you can then say, oh, I'm getting ready to emotionally eat. Yeah. And it's because my energy is low. I didn't really sleep that good last night, and I need a dopamine hit. I need a little shock of energy. And so instead of doing that, I am going to take a nap instead.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to eat that bar.
And it's super funny though, because when you said it, it does sound crazy, right? When it's the same thing if you're in marriage counseling, or if you're in, anger management, they always say, take a breath, take a step, take a pause. And it seems so unrealistic, but the reality is that we are trying to literally reprogram our brains. And so a lot of the reasons why people feel like they can't change is because the approach that they're taking is, what am I supposed to do? What is the action that's supposed to make me no longer want to crave ice cream? What is it like? It seems impossible because people are skipping a whole step, which is the neuroplasticity part, which is how do I actually change my brain so that it's not a struggle later on. In the very beginning, it can seem like a struggle because you are trying something new. But as you get used to recognizing, creating new pathways. So when this happens, I do something else now. and you keep doing something else, but every single time that feeling comes up, you recognize it, you do something else, eventually that will become the pathway that you go. You think of it like water running down a stream, right? If you take water down a stream, it's going to create grooves in the rock. Well, if you want the stream to go in a different direction, you've got to continually push the water in that direction, or you've got to open up an outlet so that it can go down the path of least resistance. Now, right now, the path of least resistance is, reaching for whatever it is that you're used to reaching for, whether that's ice cream or whether that's, whatever your vice is, because it doesn't have to be food, right? Just to give you another example of where it might not be food, it might be sleep, right? So sometimes at nighttime, if you may notice for people who are insomniacs or have problems going to sleep, that when it's time to go to bed, you get anxious, right? Your mind starts racing 100 beats per minute. And if you don't recognize, oh, this is what happens every night at this particular time, then you can't create new neural pathways because you can't recognize that you've been triggered. So I think that this is something that is really important, not just for eating and not just for, addictive behaviors around food, but around all habits that we actually want to change. And so this practice of sitting with it, the practice of breath work, this is why the breath is so important. And this is why you can't just change the diet. This is why people have a hard time just doing that one thing that's going to change their life, that's going to make them lose weight, that's going to help them, beat sugar addiction, that's going to make them healthier, that's going to stop them from drinking alcohol, or whatever it is. It's never just one thing. And I always tell people, we start with our mindset around it. We start with, the recognition, and then we move on to the next step. So I see somebody had asked a question. Okay, so now we're going to get to, will eating something healthy instead help? Or is the point not using food at all? Okay, so the first step is recognition. The second step is, what do you do? Because now you got to replace it with something. So the first step I call it recognize. The second step is replace. You've got to replace that old habit with a new habit, because you can't just leave it alone. And it might be food, right? It might be replacing it with a different food source if you're truly hungry, right? But what oftentimes happens is that when you sit with it, you realize you're not hungry, right? That you're really looking for that dopamine hit because of anxiety or something else that's coming up for you. And once you recognize that, then you can figure out something else to replace it. And oftentimes, when we have compulsive eating habits, meaning that we eat when we're not hungry, right? Then replacing it with food isn't the answer, regardless if it's a healthy choice, right? But with that being said, for some people, you need that bridge, right? So I'm not going to say, don't ever replace food with food, right? Don't replace a cookie with a carrot, like she was saying. Yes, I'm usually bored, so I eat, right? So once you recognize that this is boredom, your default, what you typically do is eat. So that's what you're going to continue to do until you give yourself another default. So when you feel that feeling of boredom, what other things could feel boredom? I always like walking, or getting some form of a distraction. So it can be the sitting with yourself. It can be meditation. It can be journaling, but it can be something really much easier. And I think oftentimes movement is something that's really helpful, right? So getting up and taking a walk, that's what I do. I'm just like, I'm going to go for a walk. Or even if it's something as simple as like, getting up to go check on something that you need to do, right? So if you know that every single, like, you don't drink enough water, you replace it with a new habit. Whenever I feel that anxiety, I'm going to go and do that thing that I know I need to do every day. It's my reminder now to do the thing that I usually forget to do, like go drink water or take my vitamins or water my plants. That's one of the things I do. I go around watering my plants. I don't know what it will be for you, but that's part of the exploration. That's part of you figuring out, what else can I replace boredom with? But it's important that you know that it's boredom, right? Because if you know it's boredom, then you just need to be on board. Find something else to entertain you. And it may be something like watching TV. Sometimes for me, it's getting on Instagram, but then that creates a whole other issue. That creates a whole other addiction, right? But you want to get out of the eating habit, so you may want to replace it with something else.
And to your point, what would you say, because this was kind of mentioned in the message that I shared with you earlier, for someone who they recognize that, yes, this is going on,
Yeah.
but there's also that truly addictive quality behind it for them.
Yeah.
And now they've transitioned that addictive, those addictive habits from eating from the food to online shopping.
Yeah.
So, but it's still an addictive quality behind it. So, I guess what is that little nuance there? How would you advise someone of resolving that component of it?
So you have to find something that you replace it with that also brings you joy, right? And I don't want to minimize this very important part about joy in our lives and being present in our lives, right? And I think that's missing from a lot of the conversation when we're talking about, changing behavior, is this idea that we're not living in the moment as much as we should. And as a result of always doing, and never really being present, that we don't know what brings us joy anymore. And so I really tell people, if you see that well, one thing I tell people is, if you see that this is a really great opportunity for maybe stepping back and maybe trying to change your food, your diet, your habits, your eating habits isn't the first step for you, right? That may be the thing that is like, okay, really, I need to get back to like learning how to be present in the moment. So, when I talk about my 7 prescriptions, right? There's personal life, which has to do with intention, food life, which has to do with food, sleep life, detox life, resilient life, which is about stress, connected life, which is about community. I always forget one every single time I do this. Did I have?
Life?
Oh, and fitness. That's the one I always forget. Okay. So there's 7 of them, right? And sometimes you really might need to shift to one of those other areas. That might need to become your focus so that you can go into something that may be a little bit more challenging with a bit more ease, because you've made room for it by getting your mindset right, by starting in personal life. Or maybe for you, it is a toxin situation, right? And if your body is burdened with a lot of toxins, then that can also drive your eating, right? And so maybe that's where you start. So sometimes it's that. The other, well, I guess this actually ties in exactly. The other thing I was going to say, which connects to connected life, which has to do with your support system, right? So oftentimes we're trying to do all of this by ourselves. And if you don't have a good support network around you to kind of help you kind of move through these situations when you don't know what else to do, then that can also be a challenge. So I always tell people, like, listen, if you have somebody else living in the house with you, if you have somebody that you call when you're in need, like, lean on your resources, create an environment where you're not feeling like you're doing it alone, because it's just like AA, right? In AA, a big part of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, when we're talking about addiction, and again, sugar addiction and food addiction are real things. You might want to apply some of those same strategies. And even in something like AA, community is super important, right? So again, oftentimes we think the solution is like direct, right? Oh, my issue is eating, so the solution has to be around eating. But oftentimes the solution is indirect. It's usually some other pathway that needs to be opened up so that you can fully live and be in that scenario where you're able to make better decisions for yourself. And then lastly, obviously the next obvious answer would be like, well, what is the direct thing that I can do? And again, I think the direct thing is to really do the same thing I was saying before, is really playing around with what else brings you joy, what other things brings you dopamine hits. So in this person's particular situation, where she was like, I've been replacing it with shopping to get that dopamine hit, but she was also very insightful and was like, but I think I'm going to use exercise instead. I think I'm going to use, I can't remember what all of them, but she gave like 4 of them.
Yeah, she loves to dance. And so she's going to incorporate that. She just can't as much anymore, but now she's going to incorporate that back in.
Yeah. And again, that goes back to like, where do you start, right? So for her, I would also say, let's take a step back and let's see, when you plan your day, right? Where can you incorporate dance? Where, like for me, it's music, like listening to music. Where can I incorporate listening to music? Because, okay, so here's a whole other approach to this. which has to do with resiliency. So that's in the resilience life. So oftentimes the reasons why we default to our default behaviors because we're stressed, right? When our stress levels are super high, it's really hard to have space to make better decisions. So in resilient life, we talk about adaptation energy. It's like creating enough energy or space in your body to be able to make better decisions or feel better in your own body. So really figuring out how do you structure your day so that you have more resiliency. And that's where sort of rituals come into play, right? So rituals that support your resiliency. Sleep, right? Ensuring that you get a good night's sleep, meditation, or deep breathing. So these are rituals that you can start to adopt. Sometimes these, you may not, again, they don't seem direct, right? They're like, oh, I'm going to meditate in the morning so that when I get into that situation of anxiety later, I know how to tap back into that same energy that I created. That's what meditation is. It's just being able to tap back into that same energy when you need it. So when you get into a ritual of meditation, that's how it works. It's like I develop a habit, and then when I need it, I can draw on it because I know what that feels like. So oftentimes we have to create situations that help us later on. And that's why we have to take a holistic approach to this thing. If we just try to say, I mean, again, if I just were to say, well, what should you replace it with? Should you replace it with just another dopamine hit? Yeah, that seems like the obvious answer, but really that's probably not the most sustainable.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you touched on the incorporating joy component, because what it makes me think of with her is where is there too much like restriction in your life?
Mm-hmm.
I think about it like, if there's too much restriction over here in this area that you do want to indulge in or partake in, but you can't for time, resources, whatever it might be, then this thing that you do have, the food,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to indulge in it as much as you want. And so if that's what you have access to, that's what you can use, then it becomes addictive because you're compensating from the restriction that you feel in this area that you do want to kind of partake in. And so I kind of think about it in that way too. So I'm glad that you touched on that. Where can you incorporate more joy? Because if you think in that way, then you can start thinking, okay, well, where am I lacking joy? Where am I depriving myself? Where can I create more space for joy in my life? And then too, when you touched on the resiliency aspect, when I'm talking to people a lot of the times who have really chaotic lives, they have the busy career, the kids, the husband, whatever, I tell them, okay, I understand. I cannot change any of those things. Your life will be just as chaotic as it's going to be. And I get, maybe you just had a newborn. I get it. It's not a whole lot, you can work with in those scenarios. So how I like to guide people in those situations is, how can you build up your resiliency to where when your day starts, you have the capacity to deal with all those things, as opposed to us taking our time to say, well, how can we change the fact that my baby doesn't sleep all through the night?
Right.
Let's put our energy somewhere else. Yeah. And let's just, like I said, like build your cup up to where when you start your day, you're like, okay, I'm ready to do this. I can tackle this. But if you start empty, then the chaos is just like going to come out.
And I think what's really important for people to recognize is that for most of us, I would say the vast majority of us, we never learned how to do that, yeah. Right? It doesn't seem surprising to me that so many of us struggle with the same issues, and that's the perception of stress. And honestly, I think this is a huge issue with how we've been sort of indoctrinated to think about stress. We think about stress as something that is that we're supposed to have to avoid. Like it's like the only way to deal with stress is to like not have it. And as opposed to how do we perceive that what's going on around us, right? Because all of us could be in the same situation and everybody experiences it differently. And so I think it's really important that we take time to recognize how we perceive the things that are stressing us. And that again goes back to step number one, which is just sort of sitting with, what is it that made me feel the way that I'm feeling? How am I feeling? What does that mean for me? How can I manipulate it? And that's where journaling comes in. But I did want to bring up one last thing as we get close to our end here. But so regardless of how much I talk about like being zen and meditating and like doing the inner work, people want quick solutions, right? And even for me in my own life, I mean, we all want something that's easy. Like, how do you deal with this in an easy way? Because oftentimes people need to be bridged, right? Between doing the hard work, it doesn't have to be hard, but you know, the work that can be seen as hard, and like the easy stuff. And so I always like to throw in there adaptogens are like one of my favorite supplement groups, because that's adaptogens are herbs or botanicals that help to balance your stress response. And so when we talk about building resiliency through habits, that can often take effort. And for so many women I know, particularly going through perimenopause and menopause, their cup is so drained, their cortisol levels are so low that they don't have the strength to even think about meditating or breathing or sitting with anything. Like, and so oftentimes this is where like an adaptogen might become really helpful. So something like ashwagandha, and in some cases, in really severe cases, I think also, you know, medications. Sometimes for women who are really, or people who are really in that deep dark hole where they've been struggling for so long and they don't know how to fix it, and they don't have the capacity or the resiliency to build back up, then really maybe starting with something like that. So as holistic as I am, I also recognize that if you've been living a certain way for 50 years or 40 years, and it's become a habit that's caused depression, anxiety, and, you know, what oftentimes can be associated with overeating, then sometimes you may have to build yourself up. And so it's important that people realize that there's no shame in needing that too, is finding other resources outside of yourself to help support you. And it doesn't always have to be a pill, but it can be, oftentimes it can be somebody else. It can be a person that helps to support you. It can be an animal that helps to support you. So there are other things that can help build you up. And I know that seems so far away from the question. Like, if I feel like I really want to eat some cake because I'm stressed, get an animal or what, you know, it seems so disparate. But what we have to realize when we're thinking about things in a holistic way, when I say that I'm holistic, or when you say that you want to do things holistically, you really have to think about, okay, what would be the whole picture, right? It's not just quick fixes or easy hacks or something like that. Look at all the factors that are playing a role, and you figure out which one is the pathway of least resistance for me, so that I can move forward and get the results that I want. And so I say that verbally because oftentimes, and I can even speak for myself, sometimes we need to give ourselves permission. It's okay that you don't know. It's okay that you need help. It's okay that you may not be able to figure it out all on your own. Use your resources, use the people around you, use the knowledge that comes from talks like this or opportunities for you to learn new things about yourself to build up to the place where you want to go. So I think that was it. What, did you have anything else as a last pointer?
No, that was it. Last pointer, just to what you just said of using your resources, you know. And if people who are watching, they really feel like, hey, I just want to know. I have a question. I just wonder, like, what should my next steps be? I think that they should book a call with you. It's the link is in your bio. Book a call, because one thing I know about you is, even if the solution isn't, hey, this program of mine that I have, and that might be the case, they're still going to walk away from the call with something.
Yeah.
Because you're gonna pour, and you're gonna give them all you got in that in that little space and window of time. So if you have any questions, or you just want like a little advice, hop on a call with Dr. Peoples, and she'll get you some good information.
Or shoot us a question. You know, we're here every Tuesday, 6 o'clock. So shoot us a question if you want to get your questions answered, and you don't, you know, we're here to answer them too. So that's just another opportunity for you. So, all right, Chatila, thank you again. This is a great talk.
All right, I'll talk to you later.
All right, lady. Bye.
Bye.